party, reminisce with my old friends, chance to share old memories, play songs again. When I got to the garden party, they all knew my name. No one recognized me. I didn't look the same, but it's alright now. I learned my lesson well. You see, you can't please everyone, so you got to please yourself.
Ricky Nelson didn't just grow up around show business. He was born inside of it. Before the rock and roll records, before the screaming crowds, before his name became shorthand for teen idol fame, there was a radio studio, a family act, and a childhood lived in front of microphones and cameras. Ricky Nelson, born Eric Hilliard Nelson, arrived into a world where performance wasn't an event, it was the household rhythm. His parents, Ozzie and Harriet Nelson, were already established entertainers, and their careers weren't just successful, they were adaptable. They moved with American media as it evolved, from big band era radio into network television. Ricky and his older brother David didn't have a normal offstage childhood. They were cast as themselves in the family sitcom, The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, a show that became one of the defining long runners of early American television. For audiences, it felt effortless, an idealized, gentle, middle-class domestic world where problems were minor and solutions came with a smile. But for Ricky, that world wasn't just something he acted in, it was the environment that shaped him. Millions of people watched him grow up in real time, watched his voice change, watched his face mature, watched him go from kid to teenager, while the nation collectively pretended it was all completely natural. But then rock and roll happened. The mid to late 1950s didn't just introduce a new kind of music, it introduced a new kind of youth identity. Elvis had cracked the door open, and suddenly American teenagers weren't just a market, they were a culture, with its own heroes, its own language, and its own style. Ricky Nelson was positioned perfectly for this moment in a way almost nobody else could replicate. He was already famous, already trusted by parents, and already beaming into homes weekly as America's good kid. And he wasn't simply handed rock and roll as a branding decision. He gravitated to it, and once he did, he committed to it. The genius, and the trap, was that he could do both at once, the family show and the jukebox hits. That combination turned him into a phenomenon. He wasn't the dangerous outsider rock star. He was the boy next door who could still swing. In the earliest phase of his music career, the appeal wasn't just that he could sing. It was that audiences felt like they knew him. They had history with him. He'd already been in their living room for years. So when he stepped up to the microphone and started cutting rockabilly and early rock records, it didn't feel like a new invention. It felt like the next chapter in a story they'd been watching since childhood. Ricky Nelson's first on-screen rock and roll moment wasn't a concert stage or a nightclub. It was primetime television. On April 10th, 1957, he performed I'm Walkin' on the show, and the effect was immediate.
I'm walking, yes indeed I'm talking for you and me, and I'm hoping that you come back to me. I'm lonely as I can be, and I'm waiting for your company, and I'm hoping that you come back to me. What you gonna do when the well runs dry? You're gonna run away and hide. I'm gonna run right by your side. For you, pretty baby, I'd even die. I'm walking, yes indeed, I'm walking for you and me, and I'm hoping that you come back to me.
Suddenly, the nice kid had a beat, a swagger, and a new kind of gravity that pulled teenagers in like a magnet. There's the thing people forget about early rock and roll. Exposure was everything, even then. And Ricky had the most powerful exposure pipeline in America. Week after week, he wasn't being introduced, he was being welcomed back. His face didn't need to be sold to the public, it was already familiar. And the records followed. Ricky's early success wasn't just a TV star who can sing. It was a carefully timed collision between the new youth market and a performer who looked like the safe version of rebellion. He could deliver rock and roll without scaring parents, which meant he could sell the music into both worlds at once, the teen world and the family living room. In 1958, he released Poor Little Fool, and when Billboard launched the Hot 100 as its new flagship single charts, the very first #1 song on that brand new list was Ricky Nelson at the top. The first official king of the Hot 100 era wasn't Elvis, Chuck Berry, or Little Richard. It was the boy from America's favorite sitcom. By late 1957 and through 1959, Ricky Nelson isn't just trying music anymore, he's living on the charts. And what makes his rise so fascinating is that it happens in two worlds at once. Bebop Baby breaks big in 1957, reaching #3 on Billboard's pop chart. And suddenly Ricky is no longer just the kid from the show. He's a continued rock and roll hitmaker. Stood Up is another eruption, #2 on Billboard's pop chart. A key turning point in keeping the record selling is a change in the band. Ricky grows dissatisfied working with older session players who, in his view, looked down on rock and roll. So he does something quietly revolutionary for a teenage star. He builds a unit that feels like his own, musicians closer to his own age, a real backing group with an identity. Guitarist James Burton becomes the anchor, and the lineup solidifies with James Kirkland on bass, Richie Frost on drums, and Gene Garf on piano. And you can trace that change in the records. Believe What You Say becomes not just another hit. It reaches #4 on the Billboard 100. And that's directly tied to the This Is My Band era beginning to take shape. Then Ricky drops a song that reveals another side of himself, the side that will matter for the rest of his life, the ballad singer with a lonely edge.
There's a place where lovers go to cry their troubles away, and they call it Lonesome Town, where the broken hearts stay. You can buy a dream or two to last you all through the years, and the only price you pay is a heart full of tears.
Lonesome Town climbs to #7 on the Hot 100, and it's a different kind of record for a teen idol, less pep and more atmosphere. By 1959, the run continues. Never Be Anyone Else But You hits #6, and It's Late reaches #9. And that's crucial because it shows Ricky isn't fading after the initial novelty wears off. He's sustaining a chart presence. And while all of this is happening, while he's cutting records and touring, Hollywood comes calling in a way that makes his stardom feel even bigger. In 1959, he appears in Howard Hawks' Rio Bravo as Colorado Ryan, alongside John Wayne and Dean Martin. The casting is perfect. Ricky as the young, cool gunfighter, the clean-cut youth icon placed inside a mythic American genre. It deepens his public identity and expands him beyond the sitcom frame. So by the end of the 1950s, you have the full Ricky Nelson paradox in full swing. A boy America watched grow up, now selling hit records to America's kids and teenagers, while trying quietly and stubbornly to be taken seriously as an artist. Because he's not just trying to stay famous, he's trying to grow up in a public space without losing the audience that made it work in the first place. And the culture is changing fast. The early rock and roll wave that crowned him is maturing, splintering into pop and doo-wop, country, surf, and soon something else entirely. That shift becomes literal on May 8, 1961, his 21st birthday, when he officially changes his recording name from Ricky Nelson to Rick Nelson. It's a small alteration on paper, but it's his declaration, trying to step out of the childhood nickname that television sealed onto him and into something that feels like a grown man's career. And right at that moment, he lands one of the defining hits of his entire life. In May 1961, Rick releases the double-sided smash Travelin' Man and Hello Mary Lou. Travelin' Man goes all the way to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100. On that same release, Hello Mary Lou becomes a major hit too, reaching number 9.
Hello, Mary Lou. Goodbye, heart. Sweet Mary Lou, I'm so in love with you. I do, Mary Lou. We never part. So hello, Mary Lou. Goodbye, heart.
But here's the trap. Rick Nelson can change his name. He can change the sound. But he can't change the way the public sees him. He's still to millions of people the kid from Ozzie and Harriet, and the show itself keeps running deep into the decade, stretching from 1952 to 1966, over 14 seasons. That means even as rock music becomes more experimental and youth culture becomes more confrontational, Rick is still attached, visibly and weakly, to America's most comforting, old-fashioned TV family image. In 1963, he signs a long-term deal with Decca Records, stepping into a bigger label. In early 1964, he scores For You, a genuine late-era top 10, peaking at number 6. After this, he does something all serious musicians do when the easy path closes. He begins to experiment. He leans into country music earlier than a lot of his peers, releasing projects like Country Fever in 1967. And almost at the same time, he tries another angle too, chasing the modern sound of that era with Another Side of Rick, released in November of 1967. A record that shows Rick reaching toward the late 60s era, folk rock textures, moodier songwriting, and contemporary covers. But that's the thing, he's not standing still. Even when the charts cool off, he keeps moving, and over time that movement leads him into something he becomes quietly important for: the early formation of country rock, that California blend of rock attitude and country instrumentation that will later become a whole mainstream lane. And then, in 1969, the reinvention becomes visible. Rick forms a new backup group, the Stone Canyon Band. And it's not some anonymous lineup. It includes players like Randy Meisner, who would later be in the Eagles, and Tom Brumley, known for his work with Buck Owens' Buckaroos. And the band debuts on a live album recorded at the Troubadour in late 1969. On October 15, 1971, Rick appears at Richard Nader's rock and roll revival, Rock and Roll Spectacular. It's one of those big oldies package concerts built on nostalgia. The bill is stacked with early rock legends, and the crowd isn't there for reinvention. Rick is advertised as a special attraction, but he walks on stage with a problem. He's not interested in simply being the Ricky Nelson slot in the oldies parade. So he starts mixing in his newer material, his present country music, alongside the older hits people came to relive. And the crowd turns on him. Boos, real booing at Madison Square Garden, aimed not at a slappy performance or scandal, but at a musician trying to play what he is now, instead of what the audience wants to remember him as. This is a knife-edge moment that only certain artists ever get to experience, when your own fans become gatekeepers of your past. And Rick doesn't just swallow it down. He doesn't quietly accept the humiliation and keep smiling. He writes it down in song. Out of that moment comes Garden Party, released in 1972. A song that functions like a postcard from the event and a warning to anyone who tries to live for the applause.
Went to a garden party, reminisce with my old friends, a chance to share old memories, play songs again. When I got to the garden party, they all knew my name. No one recognized me. I didn't look the same, but
The lyrics are full of coded, name-checking snapshots, because Rick is doing two things at once. He's telling the story, and he's exposing the machinery of nostalgia. And then comes the twist that makes Garden Party immortal. It becomes a hit. Garden Party reaches number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100, becoming Rick Nelson's last major top 40 pop hit. And in the most poetic way possible, the song about refusing to be trapped by the past becomes the record that brings him back to the mainstream. And the line that survives everything, the line that turns the whole saga into a mission statement, is simple. You can't please everyone, so you got to please yourself. Rick keeps pushing into the country rock lane he'd been carving out with the Stone Canyon Band, an era that later writers and musicians would point back to as an early groundwork for what becomes a full-on California country rock boom. And yet the industry still struggles to decide what to do with him. He's too old for the new youth marketing, and too new for the oldies circuit, and too stubborn to simply play the exact 1958 version of himself on demand. So the 1970s become a different kind of career. Not the clean, upward chart story of the 50s, but the long working life of a musician who refuses to quit. Touring, recording, reshuffling bands, and trying to keep the present tense version of Rick Nelson alive. At the same time, his personal story is fraying behind the curtain. Rick had married Kristen Harmon in 1963, and over the years they had 4 children. But the marriage ultimately ended in divorce in 1982. Then the final chapter arrives with the kind of suddenness that makes history feel quite cruel. On December 31st, 1985, Rick Nelson dies in a plane crash involving a Douglas DC-3 near DeKalb, Texas. The NTSB summary describes smoke entering the cabin after problems started in the cabin heater. The ignition source was not precisely determined. Rick Nelson's death freezes the story mid-sentence. An artist who spent his entire life trying to outgrow the image people loved. Gone before the world could fully finish reevaluating what he'd actually done. And history has reevaluated him. In 1987, he's inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, a formal stamp that he wasn't just a teen idol or a TV phenomenon, but a real foundational artist in American rock history. When you step back far enough, the Ricky Nelson story isn't really about a hit streak or a tragedy. It's about identity and what happens when the public decides it owns yours. Because Rick Nelson is one of the first modern Americans to live a life where the audience watched him grow up in real time, filed him away as a permanent good kid, and then reacted with confusion, sometimes even anger, when he tried to evolve into something else. In the end, Garden Party becomes more than a comeback single. It becomes his epitaph while he's still alive, a man telling you plainly what it cost him to be famous at a young age, and what it cost him to keep being himself, no matter what.
Well, if you can't rock me, I'll find somebody who can. Well, if you can't rock me, I'll find somebody who can. I'll get me another woman, and you can find another man. Every time we hear a rock